With that said, I'd like to introduce Greg Polk. He has walked Gandhi's Salt March. He's been inspired by that process, and he's going to energize us with his experience of following Gandhi's footsteps, quite literally. I'm not going to trip over a cord. I am so not going to trip over a cord.
No, trip over a cord. Well, thank you very much, Rosemary, for that introduction. And thank you all for the opportunity to share my experience of the Salt March and my reflections on the relevance of Gandhi and the legacy of Gandhi. Hopefully by the end of this evening, none of you will be saying, "What's the Salt March?" And Gandhi really wrote the book on nonviolent social action. He was the one who put those initial ideas in motion, thought them through, developed them through his life and his actions. Many people think of him as somebody that led the Indian independence movement, but he was obviously a lot more than that. Oh, there, I'm a little bit louder there. As Rosemary mentioned, my primary role here is to set the stage for a subsequent discussion about how to apply the concepts and principles of nonviolence and the ideas and techniques of Gandhi. There won't be any one answer to that question. There are many different possibilities that we could imagine. And as I think of it, what is the Salt March of our time, as Rosemary said? And as I go through the presentation, give some thought to how you might, what kind of a situation beyond the Dakota Access Pipeline situation, what kinds of situations might you imagine these principles being applied to? I've given this presentation on a number of occasions, but I've changed the focus of it slightly today. I'm going to spend less time on the Salt March itself. I'm going to give you a flavor of it and give you the background on it, but spend a lot more time on the ideas of Gandhi. So if I wander a bit, bear with me. I'll get myself back on track as soon as possible. To be honest, I came to the ideas of Gandhi relatively late. Despite the fact that I was a draft resistor in the 60s and joined the Peace Corps in the 70s, have been a vegetarian all of my adult life and committed to nonviolence, I really didn't know that much about Gandhi until my wife, Rebecca, and I had the opportunity to live in work in South Africa. Now, many people don't realize that Gandhi spent nearly 21 years of his life in South Africa. And it was in South Africa where he developed many of the ideas that we have come to associate with Gandhi. The march idea, his ideas of truth, and we'll come back to these ideas later. His idea of nonviolence, his idea of kind of a cooperative, non-confrontational, non-violent engagement with the oppressors. And Gandhi, through that process, of course, became a significant leader of the Indian what we'd call civil rights movement in South Africa. That interest then continued when we had the opportunity to go to move and work in South Africa in the early 2000s. And it was there that I developed the interest specifically in the Salt March. And that came about as a result of coming across a book by Thomas Weber called On the Salt March. And Thomas Weber is a Gandhi scholar, Australian historian who rewalked every mile of the 240 miles of the Salt March on exactly the same days that Gandhi did it. But beyond the kind of physical feat that represented, he did it as a kind of meditation on the ideas of Gandhi and the legacy of Gandhi. And I said, what a great idea. I get a lot out of, and I'm sure you do as well, get a lot out of actually being in the place that events occur, or that people that you revere took some action. So I said, great idea. I'll do it. I'll do the Salt March. Had that plan to do the Salt March. Unfortunately, life kept getting in the way, and 5 years passed. We lived in India for 5 years, and one thing led to the other. Life got in the way, and I wasn't actually able to to fulfill the idea of recreating the Salt March, revisiting the Salt March, until December of last year. So this is a very recent experience for me. During that hiatus between when I first became interested in Gandhi and when I was actually able to re-walk the Salt March, and in my case, let me clarify. I didn't walk every mile of the Salt March. For me, I very advisedly use the term retrace. Maybe 10 years earlier, when I had the idea, I might have walked the whole thing. But at this stage of the game, I decided it would be good enough to experience it by a variety of modes of vehicle. And I'll show you some of that when we get a little further along. But my point was going to be that in that period of time between when I first became introduced to Gandhi to when I was actually able to retrace the Salt March, I had the opportunity to immerse myself in the literature, in the volumes of literature, both of Gandhi and by Gandhi. The collected works of Gandhi alone covers 100 volumes. I did not read every volume of the collected works of Mahatma Gandhi, not to mention all the things that have been written about him. But it was an amazing opportunity for me to delve into a very complex person. And through that process, I realized just to what extent his ideas, many of his ideas resonated with ideas that I had developed over the years, but had never put together in the way that Gandhi did. But I was also struck by how many other people were influenced by Gandhi. People that, of course, we all know, Martin Luther King, and the extent to which the ideas of nonviolence came from Gandhi. But less known people like Aung San Suu Kyi, the leader of the Burma democratic movement, who was just here visiting with Obama. She was in house arrest for 15 years and led the democratic movement from her home in house arrest. And she attributes to Gandhi both the strength that it took to continue to struggle in that environment and her determination to keep the democratic movement in Burma nonviolent. But other people like Cesar Chavez, many of us are familiar with Cesar Chavez, but I was not aware of the extent to which he applied the concepts of Gandhi, even more thoroughly than Martin Luther King, who is more closely associated with Gandhi, and I'll talk about him a little later. Of course, Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela were very much influenced by Gandhi in establishing the Truth and Reconciliation process in South Africa after apartheid. One of the ones that I particularly, one of my favorites is E.F. Schumacher, the author who wrote Small is Beautiful. And so we think of Gandhi in terms of nonviolence, but in fact he also was an advocate of stewardship of the earth and what we call now environmentalism. And E.F. Schumacher was very influenced by Gandhi, took those ideas in his book, Small is Beautiful, and applied it to the idea of development, of economic development. And finally, Stephen Covey. Gandhi's ideas apply as much to mediation and reconciliation as they do to nonviolent confrontation or nonviolent action in service to a social cause. Stephen Covey was the author of the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, very much influenced by Gandhi. And if someone could remove that card from in front of the projector. So on to the Salt March. Let me back up a little bit here. There we go. So on to the Salt March. Many people think of the Salt March as simply an act of civil disobedience sparking the Indian independence movement. It was, in fact, for Gandhi, a demonstration of all of the ideas that he hoped would be shared with an independent India and with the world. But to put it in, let me step back and put it a bit in context. I want to highlight just how far Gujarat, so the Salt March was occurred in the state of Gujarat in western India. So there's the state of Gujarat. New Delhi is here. Agra is where the Taj Mahal is located. Rajasthan, that many of you might know, is located there. It's about 600 miles from New Delhi to Ahmedabad. This is the route of the Salt March. Now let me give you some of the basic facts here. The Salt March, as Rosemary said, began at Gandhi's ashram just north of Ahmedabad and extended 240 miles south, winding its way through the various villages of Gujarat to the seacoast, the coast of the Arabian Sea at Dandi. And it's often referred to as the Dandi Salt March. Gandhi started this, he began the Salt March on the 12th of March in 1930. Gandhi was 60 years old at this point, and he was already starting to show the signs of age, but he led the Salt March, walked every single mile of those 240 miles. And with him, he carefully selected 78 fellow marchers. Now, he called his fellow marchers satyagrahi, and he called the Salt March Satyagraha, and I'll define that a little later. But he had 78 carefully selected individuals with him that reflected the diversity of India, the social diversity, the religious diversity, the geographical diversity, and every single one of them was committed to nonviolence. And when Gandhi and his marchers left the Sabarmati ashram, they fully expected to be arrested and beaten at any moment along the way. But they were committed to nonviolence. Now, I want to just show a few slides. I want to move through, as I mentioned, I want to move through these slides fairly quickly of the Salt March itself and get to the underlying ideas. So there are my fellow travelers. Himanshu on the left is an Indian friend based in Delhi. And this is Linda Logan Condon, a friend here, a photographer friend here in New Mexico that accompanied me. Yeah, thank you. Now, let me explain briefly the salt tax. So the British had been basically imposing the salt, a tax on salt from the time that they took control of India in the mid-1700s. In the late 1800s, they codified that salt tax and applied it to all of India, not only the areas that they controlled directly, but also the areas that they, the quasi-independent kingdoms that were within the geography of India. So there are two core questions I wanted to say. Oh yeah, it was not only a tax, it was also a monopoly, as Rosemary said. The average Indian, even if they lived next to the ocean, could not, were outlawed, banned from boiling water and making salt. So there are two questions that I want to pose to sort of give you an insight into Gandhi's thinking before we go into the full discussion of his principles. One is why salt, and the second is why Gujarat. For Gandhi, salt represented everything that was wrong with the British control of India. It was exploitive, it was inequitable because everybody needed salt, and the tax applied equally to the poorest of the poor and the richest of the rich, and it was humiliating to Indians. It undermined their ability for self-determination and independence. So for Gandhi, this was the perfect symbol to rally people around in service to the independent movement. And that same thinking, it took him months to come up with this idea. The Indian National Congress, the group that was leading the independence movement, passed a resolution declaring Indian independence in December of 1929. And all eyes turned to Gandhi because Gandhi had clearly established himself as the leader of the common Indian, the average Indian. So what was Gandhi going to do to rally that broad base of support for the independence movement? And Gandhi reflected on this and came up with the idea of salt. In a similar way that Cesar Chavez came up with the grape boycott, which transformed the labor negotiation between farm worker and owner into a national cause. Everybody could participate in the boycott of salt, in the boycott of grapes. Everybody could participate in the defiance of the salt laws and the salt tax. So why Gujarat? Why not just organize a march to the capital of Delhi, to the seat of imperial power? Why Gujarat? For Gandhi, organizing this protest walk in Gujarat represented something that would resonate with all of India, the average Indian. You have to remember at that time, India was about probably 95% rural, 95% poor farmers dispersed among thousands of villages across India. A march in Delhi, a march to the capital, a march to the seat of power of the British Empire would not have any relevance to people outside of the urban areas. But he realized that if he did it in Gujarat, everybody could relate to that. Everybody could imagine themselves taking a similar action elsewhere in India. So why salt? Why Gujarat. And those give you some idea as to how Gandhi thought about the Salt March and how he imagined it resonating with people throughout India. So this is where he lived at the time that he launched the Salt March. This is along the banks of the Sabarmati River, just north of Ahmedabad. And it was from here he and his 78 marchers started. Now, I want to just these are just a few slides to give you a sense of India today. And it is this, as you know, this country of extreme contrasts, from super modern apartment buildings and shopping centers and office blocks and industrial zones, to images like this, that if you took that in black and white and you said that was 1930s, you'd be hard-pressed to dispute it. Much of India still is, and much of the route along the Salt March still is, as it was many years ago. Now, one of the things I discovered in doing this is there's no signage of the Salt March. There's no markers, unbeknownst to me, and as a result, I gave too little time to retrace the Salt March. Even if we did it mostly by vehicle, I did walk certain segments, but even if we did it mostly by vehicle, every day we got up, and I have a number of these slides. Each day was from morning until evening. I had my notes of the various spots that Gandhi had passed through, and Himanshu at the wheel, and speaking Hindi, was rolling down the window asking guys like this, how do we get from here to there? It was a laborious process. But I was determined, and Himanshu became determined as well, to find the exact route of the Salt March. And I wanted to show you, this resulted in a map that I have posted on the website. If any of you are interested in retracing Gandhi's Salt March, it is there for you. I'll give you the address of the website later. So it was, and this gives you a bit of a sense of what the the route is in many places. Now, the government, as a tourism promotion idea, has rebuilt portions of the Salt March, but they don't follow the exact route. They sort of, you know, it's kind of vaguely in the general direction, but it doesn't go exactly. If you want to go exactly how Gandhi did it, this is what you're going to be on. And this is what you're going to be seeing, as opposed to some of the superhighways. Now, it was a torturous process. This is a river Gandhi and his marchers had to cross in this boat that's been preserved in a museum in Delhi. And what was interesting about this particular moment is Nehru came to confer with Gandhi as he crossed the Mahi River in Gujarat. And you can imagine what it must have been like for Nehru and the delegation of independence leaders, these, you know, very proper British-educated lawyers coming from Delhi on narrow gauge train to Ahmedabad, and then by car to the edge of this river, and by boat across to the other side to confer with Gandhi. But Gandhi, that gives you a sense of how significant Gandhi was in the eyes of the leaders of the independence movement, of which he was one. I'm not saying he was not a leader of the independence movement, but among the more urban, educated leaders of the independence movement, that they would come and track him down in the middle of nowhere to confer with him. Now, one of the aspects of the Salt March for Gandhi is that it was a rolling lecture it was 25 days. He spent 25 days doing these 240 miles. And so there were only about 10 miles a day. He would start early in the morning. He'd walk 5 miles, reach a small village. It had been pre-arranged. There had been an advance committee. And he would settle in. He would give a speech, have lunch, afternoon, pick up, march to the next 5 miles, on average 5 miles away, and do the same thing. But Gandhi very consciously organized it this way to be able to both draw attention to the independence movement and gain momentum as he went along through that attention, but also use it as an opportunity to speak to the kinds of social issues that he wanted to see addressed in an independent India. And one of those issues, very close to Gandhi's heart, was untouchability. Untouchability, for those of you not familiar, it's an idea in Hindu religion that there is a group of people designated to and by reincarnation that have no choice but to be fill all of the worst jobs in society, and the most symbolic of that is the cleaning of toilets. And these people, because of this status, are untouchable. They are shunned. They live separate from the rest of the community, and they represent about 20% of the population of India. So we're talking about a huge number of people in this category. Gandhi, in his way, in his analysis and understanding of Hindu, rejected this idea as intrinsic to Hinduism. And he lectured, and this would be like, I imagine this like, if you wandered into a small town in rural Wyoming, gathered all of the community leaders together to give them a lecture on gun control. You can imagine the temerity, because he was challenging something that was so totally ingrained in the Indian psyche. And he did this over and over and over again and confronted Indians with the injustice of this tradition that had nothing to do, in his mind, with religion. At this particular spot in Daban, he walked through the village directly to the untouchable portion, the untouchable area, which is always at the margins of the main village or community, walked directly into the community and drew water from the untouchable's well. And because everybody were forced to follow him from the village, they too had to come in too, which they had, of course, never done before. So that's the kind of person Gandhi was, and that's what he used the Salt March for. Another thing that was very, very close to Gandhi's heart, and that he used the Salt March to promote, was Hindu-Muslim relations. And this is a spot along the way where he made a speech. This is the tomb of a Sufi priest who. And Gandhi used the opportunity to make an appeal, and he did this at many points along the way. And elsewhere he spoke to issues of self-determination, of independence, of in what we would call environmental awareness, concern for nature. So at each stop he had a speech he would give. It was always off the top of his head. This is just a photo that I particularly like of the kids. This is at a school. Gandhi and his marchers had stopped at this school and spent the night. And we arrive in the schoolyard, and these kids come rushing out at us.
Love their smile.
Yeah, great. So at the destination, just to wrap this up, Gandhi had announced, Gandhi believed that you never surprise your opponent. You never humiliate your opponent. You always declare your intentions to your opponent. It's part of his philosophy of nonviolence, of satyagraha, to not surprise your opponent, to always engage them in the process. Give them the opportunity at all turns to accommodate and change their mind, change their awareness. So he had told the British government where he was going and that he intended to break the salt laws at Dundee. The clever British, although they hadn't arrested, they had decided very consciously not to arrest him, to turn him into a symbol of the independence. They removed all of the salt pans from Dundee, from the shoreline of Dundee. So by the time Gandhi got there, there were no salt pans that he could make salt in. But being the clever man that he was, he had declared that he was going to, or he had said that he was going to declare independence and declare the defiance of the salt laws when he arrived in Dundee. So what he did, instead of make salt formally, what he did is he scooped up a handful of salt and then took it back, a handful of sand, and then took it, boiled it down. It didn't produce much salt, but it was an act of producing salt and launched the... But that wasn't the end of the Salt March. Gandhi, from Dundee, sorry for the alliteration there, retreated to, or left Dundee and moved to a town of Matwad, about 3 miles away, and spent a couple of weeks there organizing, because the British had removed the salt pans at Dundee. He decided that they needed to march on the salt works, the Dharasana salt works, which are about 30 miles south of Dundee. And it was from this town of Matwad that he organized that assault, action at Dharasana. He was arrested here and thrown in jail before that actually could happen, but his followers continued the Salt March and carried on to Dharasana. And this is the scene, if any of you have seen the movie Gandhi. This is the scene where they're all lining up in a row and marching into the soldiers who are whacking them with their batons falling. By the end of this action, and this went on every single day for a month, people from all over India converged after Gandhi had declared the salt action at Dundee, defied the salt laws. People converged from all over India. And about 400 people were hurt during this action. But it thoroughly revealed, as Gandhi expected, it thoroughly revealed the extent to which and the brutality of the British Empire, which of course galvanized the independence movement and mobilized the people around him. Now, those are the facts of the Salt March. But they missed the essential point for Gandhi. As Gandhi said, the battle was not to free the country, but simultaneously to build a better one. And I would add, it was simultaneously to build a better world, not just a better India. And I wanted to now step back from the Salt March and summarize briefly the ideas that the Salt March demonstrated for Gandhi and are the legacy of the Salt March for us today and why we're talking about it. And I'm going to use a framework from Martin Luther King, this was laid out in his Stride Towards Freedom book in 1958. There are many, many different thinkers and writers on nonviolence, but the most concise summary that I've ever found was written by Martin Luther King based upon Gandhi's principles. And he neatly summed it up in 6 principles that I want to share with you, and that I want you that I hopefully will frame the discussion later about how we might apply these principles. Principle 1, nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. There are 2 parts to that principle. One, it's a way of life. And Gandhi believed that you had to truly feel nonviolence in your being. As he framed it, nonviolence is not a garment to be put on and off at will. Its seat is in the heart and must be an inseparable part of our very being. And this is often discussed among people who are organizing nonviolent actions. It can't be seen as just a tactic. It has to be a deeper conviction to a nonviolent approach. Because if it's just a tactic, then it will be easily abandoned if confronted and assaulted. The second part of it is it's for courageous people. Gandhi always felt that people were complicit in their own oppression. That if we simply rejected the oppression, rejected the injustice, collectively, it would end. Now that's easier said than done, but that the act of nonviolence is a powerful act, is a courageous act. Second principle, Martin Luther King's second principle. Nonviolence seeks to win friendship and understanding. This is core to Gandhi's concept of satyagraha that I mentioned earlier. And Gandhi coined this term, satyagraha. He coined it when he was in South Africa and brought it with him to India. In essence, it means the force of truth. And that means if you have this understanding of injustice, and if you have this conviction for nonviolence, then you are motivated to action. But you're motivated not against an individual, not against people per se, but about the system that perpetuates the injustice, the oppression, the exploitation. And if you come at it from that point of view, you're able, as Nelson Mandela so thoroughly demonstrated during his period of incarceration in South Africa, to make friends even among the most apparently determined opponents. Thirdly, nonviolence seeks to defeat injustice, not people. Now, this is a bit of a continuation of the second one, but it's an important distinction that your objective is to attack, confront, challenge the injustice itself, but not the individuals. Gandhi had a great quote on this: that action alone is just that does not harm either party in a dispute. That's an ambitious ideal, but it's one to keep in mind. Fourthly, nonviolence holds that suffering can educate and transform. Now, this is a bit of a controversial one, and there's a lot of debate among people in the nonviolent and social justice movement. To what extent is suffering necessary? Clearly, Martin Luther King And those who challenged the Jim Crow laws of the South suffered extensively and used that suffering very effectively to raise awareness of the injustice of the racial and Jim Crow laws of the South. I would frame it to make it less of a controversial debate. The other issue with suffering is that it limits it limits the way people think about how they can be involved in nonviolent action, suffering. I would say sacrifice. There has to be some sacrifice. There has to be something at risk for those engaged in nonviolent action. And it doesn't have to be suffering. It could be any number of different ways that one could put oneself at risk. But it's in doing that that you focus your mind. You make a commitment to follow it through to the end. Fifthly, nonviolence chooses love instead of hate. This comes from Gandhi's concept of ahimsa. And of course, ahimsa comes from the Hindu religion, but Gandhi reinterpreted everything. So he transformed this concept from Hindu religion to basically mean nonviolence. So this is his concept of nonviolent relationship to the world. Some call it love. Some call it ahimsa. Some call it nonviolence. You can call it what you want, but it's a total kind of understanding and a total way of relating to the world. Sixth and last in Gandhi's, in Martin Luther King's framework of principles of nonviolence, nonviolence believes that the universe is on the side of justice. Now this is an interesting concept, and it's hard to hang on to. Gandhi, if Gandhi could hang on to this principle in the face of everything that he dealt with, I think we should be able to hang on to the belief that the universe is on the side of justice. And Gandhi had a very, very interesting quote on this. The difference between what we do and what we are capable of doing would suffice to solve most of the world's problems. Isn't that an interesting idea? And it's in that space between what we do, what we actually do, both individually and collectively as people, and what we are capable of, that lies this need for nonviolent action. So those are the ways that I see Gandhi's ideas as relevant to us today as they were at the time that he organized the Salt March in 1930. And just in closing, this is a quote by Gandhi. I just want to close with a couple of quotes. I know the path. It is straight and narrow. It is like the edge of a sword. I rejoice in walking on it. And that very much captures Gandhi. He was always on the edge. He was always pushing the limits. And all of us in our own way can do similar. And finally, this is the sum of Gandhi's life. My life is my message. His message was the sum total of his actions. Now, Gandhi, of course, worked on a palette that covered all of India and has translated forward to today. The rest of us have to work on a smaller palette. But for each of us, our life is our message. And how we go about that and how we make contributions in ways, no matter how small, are important. And Gandhi would encourage all of us to do that in any way that we can. And of course, the fact that you are here tonight means that you are interested in that and concerned about those issues as well. So with that, I will turn it back over to Rosemary for, thank you.